The year was 1990. Sean Combs stood outside Uptown Records, the towering building looming over him, casting a long shadow in the dusk. His heart pounded, a knot tightening in his stomach. He was young, a Harlem kid who had dropped out of Howard University to chase a dream that seemed too big to hold. But he knew one thing: if he didn't seize this moment, he'd regret it forever. Inside Uptown Records, the energy was frenetic, a hive buzzing with the sounds of hit songs and hushed deal-making. This wasn't just any label. This was the label. With artists like Mary J. Blige and Jodeci on its roster, Uptown was untouchable. Behind it all was Andre Harrell, a visionary who had built an empire. And Sean Combs. He was no ordinary intern. Determined, he spent long hours watching, learning, pushing his way into rooms he didn't belong. While others fetched coffee, Sean, the man who would one day be known as Diddy, had an eye for talent and an ear for hits. He was here not just to take orders, but to take over. But Uptown had its own shadows. Whispers floated through the halls, quiet enough to feel like secrets. And often those whispers ended with a name. By 1993, Sean's rise was meteoric, too meteoric. His ambition clashed with Harrell's, their visions like sparks in dry air. Sean wanted more control, more power. He could see where the industry was heading, and he knew he had the talent to shape it. But Harrell wasn't ready to give up his crown. Then, the break came. Sean, frustrated with fighting for a seat at someone else's table, walked away with nothing but his ambition, and a fire that burned hotter than ever. He'd build his own empire, Bad Boy Records. With Biggie Smalls on his radar and a vision bigger than Uptown itself, all he needed was the funding. And that's when the whispers about Clive Davis came seeping back into his life. Clive Davis was a legend, but his legend came with stories, darker stories. The industry's whispers were like a horror story, rumors that Clive's power went beyond music, deeper, older, and far more dangerous. The first time Sean heard Clive's name in connection to his own future, it was during a late-night meeting. A grizzled insider leaned in, his voice low, his gaze darting as though watching for unseen listeners. "You know what they say about Clive, right?" Sean smirked, dismissive. "They say a lot of things about a lot of people." "No," the man insisted, his voice barely audible. "Not like this. Clive, he doesn't just make stars, he owns them. And once you deal with him, you're never free. He records more than music." Sean's frown deepened. "What the hell does that mean?" The man shook his head, the fear stark in his eyes. "Just be careful. If Clive's interested in you, he'll get you, one way or another." Sean brushed it off as superstition, industry paranoia. But somewhere deep inside, the warning lingered. Weeks later, Sean's phone rang. The voice on the other end was unmistakable. Clive Davis. The meeting was set in an old hotel in Midtown Manhattan, its faded decor echoing a forgotten era. As Sean walked down a long, dim corridor to the suite, a chill ran through him. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing colder with each step. Inside, Clive waited. Seated at a table draped in deep red cloth, he greeted Sean with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. A single lamp flickered in the corner, casting shadows that twisted in unsettling ways. "Sean," Clive greeted, his voice smooth, steady. "I've been watching you." Sean held his ground, cool as ever. "I appreciate that. I've got plans. Big ones. Bad Boy Records is going to change the game." Clive's eyes gleamed. "I know. You've got the drive, the talent. But to succeed at this level, you need more than just skill. You need backing." Sean's hands were damp, but he forced himself to stay calm. "That's why I'm here. I want to take Bad Boy to the top." Clive leaned forward, his smile widening slightly. "I can give you what you need. I can make Bad Boy the biggest label in the world. I can make you a legend." Sean's chest tightened. "What's the price?" Clive chuckled, a sound that felt wrong, like a lullaby sung off-key. "Everything has a price, Sean. But what I offer isn't just success. It's immortality, fame beyond the charts, power beyond the music, but you'll have to give me something in return." The room felt as if it was closing in, the air thick and suffocating. "What are you asking for?" Clive's gaze darkened, his face shifting, shadows warping his features. "Your loyalty, your soul." Sean's pulse thundered in his ears. Had he heard that right? The stories, the whispers, they were true. Clive Davis wasn't just offering a record deal. He was offering something darker, something twisted and ancient. Sean's voice was barely a whisper. I don't understand. Clive's smile morphed, grotesque, his eyes gleaming with a hunger. Oh, you understand. You'll get the fame, the power, but you'll be mine. I'll record it all, Sean. Not just your music, your essence, your soul. Sean's head spun. The room felt like it was tilting, the walls closing in on him. The legends, the stories about Clive recording more than just music, about artists who vanished after dealing with him. It was all true. And now he stood at the edge of that same abyss. Clive's voice was as smooth as silk, almost hypnotic. You won't regret it. You'll have everything you've ever wanted. Sean's heart pounded, his mind racing. This wasn't just a record deal. It was a pact, a deal with something far darker than he'd ever imagined. With a shaky breath, he whispered, "I'm willing." From that day forward, everything changed. Bad Boy Records exploded, Biggie became a legend, and Sean's empire grew beyond anything he could have dreamed. But at night, alone in the dark, Sean couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He felt it, the presence, like a shadow at the edge of his vision. Clive was watching, and not just through contracts or deals. No, it was something deeper, something twisted. It was as if every record, every song captured more than just sound. It captured him, his essence, his soul. He had made the deal, and now there was no going back. He had everything he ever wanted, but deep down, he knew his soul was no longer his own. And somewhere, in the shadows of the industry, Clive Davis still held the tapes. He had recorded it all. In the early 2000s, Sean Diddy Combs was the epitome of fame and power. He threw extravagant parties that were whispered about in Hollywood's elite circles. But there was one yacht party that few spoke of openly, and even fewer remembered fondly. A night that's become an eerie legend among the inner circle. It was a warm summer night in Miami, and Diddy had rented one of the largest, most luxurious yachts in the world to celebrate the success of his latest venture. Rumors swirled that the night was meant to be exclusive, a who's who of celebrities, musicians, and models invited to experience what Diddy promised would be the party of a lifetime. The yacht was decked out in gold accents, with private bars, jacuzzis, and even a stage for performances. But what no one knew was that this night would become unforgettable for reasons no one could have ever anticipated. Guests arrived in style, ushered onto the massive yacht by private security. Laughter and chatter filled the air, and the beat of the music echoed across the water. But there was something off. As the yacht set sail, some guests noticed that the crew members avoided eye contact and spoke in hushed tones. And then there was the temperature. The air on board felt thick, almost stifling, despite the open sea around them. As the yacht sailed further from the shore, the party grew louder. Drinks flowed and celebrities mingled under the stars. But then as the night reached its peak, something strange happened. The lights flickered. At first, no one paid much attention. It was a yacht party after all. Maybe the lights were just on a dimmer, but the flickering grew more erratic, almost rhythmic, as if matching the pulse of the music. And then, in an instant, all the lights went out. For a moment, silence fell over the yacht, broken only by the faint sound of waves lapping against the hull. People began to pull out their phones, using the glow to find each other. Some laughed nervously, thinking it was just part of the show. Diddy, however, was nowhere to be seen. Guests called out to him, thinking he might be planning a dramatic reappearance, but he didn't answer. Then came the first scream. A woman's voice cut through the darkness from one of the lower decks. Her scream was raw, filled with terror. Some people brushed it off, thinking she'd just seen something trivial. But then another scream echoed, this one deeper, more desperate. One of the guests, a famous actor, shouted, "Everyone stay calm, it's probably just a prank." But his voice trembled. The laughter had faded, replaced by uneasy murmurs. The lights came back on with a sudden flash, revealing a disturbing sight. In the center of the deck lay a broken champagne flute, its jagged edges slick with fresh blood. A crimson stain trailed across the polished floor, leading toward a stairwell that descended to the lower levels. A small group of guests, emboldened by curiosity and a few too many drinks, decided to follow the blood trail. They made their way down the staircase, the unsettling quiet around them growing with each step. They found the woman who had screamed. She was huddled in a corner, her hands trembling as she stared at the walls, her face pale. I saw him," she whispered, her eyes wide with horror. "Who?" someone asked, trying to comfort her. She pointed a shaking finger down the corridor. A man. His face. It was wrong. Like a shadow, but with eyes that didn't belong. The group exchanged nervous glances. They decided to keep going, pressing deeper into the dimly lit corridor. Strange symbols appeared on the walls, faint scratches in the paint, as if someone had scrawled them in a hurry. As they moved through the passage, a chill settled over them. The yacht should have felt humid, but instead, the air was icy, like the depths of winter. They finally reached a door at the end of the corridor. They hesitated, feeling an almost instinctive urge to turn back, but something pushed them forward. They opened the door, revealing a room filled with mirrors that reflected them from every angle. In the center of the room stood a lone figure, his back turned. In a panic, they looked around, seeking any way out. The shadow figure continued to approach, its form flickering like a bad signal, moving closer until it was mere inches away. And then, it spoke in a voice that was low, almost a whisper, but filled with malice. "Your fame," it murmured, "comes with a price." The lights flickered again and the figure was gone. The mirrors returned to normal and the door unlocked. Shaken, the guests bolted from the room, running up the stairs as fast as they could. When they reached the main deck, they found Diddy, standing alone at the helm, watching the dark ocean. He turned to them, a curious smile on his face, as if nothing had happened. His eyes held a strange gleam, something far colder than they'd ever seen in him. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice casual. "Y'all look like you've seen a ghost." The guests exchanged horrified glances, each of them deciding never to speak of what they'd seen in the depths of that yacht. The yacht returned to shore at dawn. Most of the guests left in a hurry, their faces pale, their spirits broken. Some went on with their lives, burying the memories as best they could. But others weren't so lucky. Over the years, strange things began happening to those who had been on that yacht. Their careers faltered, personal lives shattered, and a few even disappeared without a trace. It was as if a shadow had attached itself to them, a darkness they could never quite escape. Years passed, and Diddy continued to reign in the music world. But something had shifted in him since that night. He began choosing his acquaintances carefully, surrounding himself with people who were young, ambitious, and maybe a little too eager for fame. And that's when he met a young rapper named Fabulous. Fabulous was talented, raw, and ready to make his mark. Diddy saw something in him, a hunger, a spark, a drive that reminded him of himself in his younger days. But Diddy knew that with Fabulous's rising star came an opportunity. At a party one night, Diddy pulled Fabulous aside. He spoke in low tones just as the music softened, and his gaze bore into Fabulous's with an intensity that sent a chill down the young rapper's spine. "Stick with me," Diddy said, his voice smooth. "I'll take you places you've never dreamed of. But remember, fame comes with a price." And as the night wore on, Fabulous couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in Diddy's gaze, there lurked a shadow, a darkness that whispered promises and threats. From that moment on, Fabulous was drawn into Diddy's world, and though he tried to ignore it, he couldn't shake the sense that he too was stepping into something far more sinister than he'd ever imagined. Eric stood in the middle of the neon-lit hall, the smell of cigar smoke and a faint hint of something sweeter hanging in the air. His best friend, Ray, now the famous producer Ray Carson, had pulled him into this world, and tonight's party was meant to be unforgettable. It was Ray's freak-off, a hush-hush wild night held in an opulent mansion on the outskirts of LA. Eric knew the party was a rite of passage in Ray's circle, something about pushing boundaries and flaunting the kind of wealth that made every day seem like a horror movie nightmare. Ray and Eric had grown up on the same rundown block, two kids with big dreams. But when Ray made it big, Eric had fallen behind, working 3 jobs while Ray climbed to platinum heights. The fame had changed Ray, though, like he was always playing a role, leaving behind the friend Eric once knew. This invitation had been his way of reuniting, and Eric felt excited, but uneasy. Ray was hard to read these days. A booming bass pulsed through the hall, vibrations sinking into his chest. Beautiful people roamed the rooms in costumes, some wearing animal masks, others barely clothed. Ray greeted him with a wide grin, draped in a shimmering suit that looked almost supernatural under the neon lights. "Glad you made it, man." Ray clapped a hand on Eric's shoulder. "Tonight's a night to remember, I promise you." Ray didn't stick around long, but a drink was quickly pressed into Eric's hand. He took a sip and immediately regretted it, a bitter burn lingering in his throat as he forced it down. He chalked it up to his nerves. He wasn't used to this lifestyle. Moving through the mansion, he caught glimpses of the guests indulging in dark corners, their laughter ringing hollow and unsettling. A woman with a fox mask sidled up to him, her gaze piercing even through the disguise. "You're new here, aren't you?" she purred. Eric nodded, unsure how to respond. "Just a little advice." She leaned in, her voice low. "Don't wander alone. This place has hidden rooms. Some parties here don't end." Before he could ask what she meant, she slipped away into the crowd, disappearing like a ghost. Her words left a chill on his skin, and he rubbed his arms, as if that could shake the unease creeping in. He glanced around for Ray, but he was nowhere in sight. Shrugging it off, he wandered further into the mansion, drawn by an inexplicable curiosity. The deeper he went, the stranger the vibe became. The people were louder here, their eyes wilder, and their laughter sharper. The hallways twisted and turned, leaving Eric disoriented. He tried to retrace his steps, but nothing seemed familiar. Every turn led him to another room filled with people in animal masks, watching him as he passed, whispering things he couldn't quite catch. A heavy hand clamped onto his shoulder, startling him. He spun around to find Ray's manager, Greg, towering over him. Greg was a huge man, always dressed in black, with a no-nonsense expression that unnerved Eric. "Ray's looking for you, upstairs. He's waiting," Greg said, his voice almost robotic. "Where is he?" Eric asked, but Greg simply pointed to a set of stairs that seemed to disappear into darkness. The stairs creaked under his feet as he climbed, the sound echoing eerily. At the top, he found a long hallway lined with doors, each one painted black. The muffled sounds of revelry faded as he reached the end of the hallway, where a single red door stood ominously. A faint whisper seemed to slip from behind it, like a breath of wind. "Ray?" he called out, knocking softly. No answer. He pushed the door open and stepped into a dimly lit room, the walls covered in dark red velvet. A single armchair sat in the center, facing away from him. It felt like he was being watched, a presence heavy in the room. Cautiously, he walked around the chair, expecting to find Ray lounging in his usual lazy fashion. But the chair was empty. The door slammed shut, making him jump. He turned around, his heart pounding, but there was no one there. Trying to keep calm, he approached the door, his hand reaching for the handle. It wouldn't budge. Panic clawed at his throat as he yanked harder, but it was like the door had fused with the wall. A soft, mocking laugh echoed from behind him. "Enjoying the party?" the voice whispered. Eric spun around, but the room was empty. Then, from the shadows, Ray stepped forward, a grin twisted onto his face that Eric had never seen before. "Ray, man, I was looking for you," Eric said, relief flooding him, but something about Ray looked off. His eyes seemed darker, sunken in his face, and his smile held no warmth. "Don't you get it, Eric?" Ray asked, his voice low, almost taunting. "You're here for the main event." "What do you mean?" Eric stammered, backing away. The walls seemed to close in, the red velvet appearing almost blood-like under the dim lights. "Remember when we used to talk about our dreams, the places we'd go, the things we'd do?" Ray's smile widened, and he gestured around. "Well, I've made it, and you're here to help me keep it." Eric felt a cold sweat trickle down his spine. "What are you talking about?" Ray stepped closer, his shadow stretching unnaturally, almost doubling in size as it loomed over Eric. His voice dropped to a whisper, chilling and malicious. "I had to make a few sacrifices to get here," Ray said, eyes gleaming. "Every year I have to invite someone from my past, someone who won't be missed. That's the price, Eric, that's the freak-off." The realization hit Eric like a punch to the gut. He backed away, horror dawning on him. "You're saying you're going to—" Ray's laughter echoed through the room, a hollow, haunting sound. "It's nothing personal, man. But fame doesn't come for free. They're watching, the guests. They're here to witness it." As if on cue, the walls shifted, revealing windows filled with faces staring in, all wearing those eerie animal masks. They watched him with silent anticipation, their expressions hidden, but their intent clear. "Please, Ray, we're friends," Eric whispered, desperation thick in his voice. Ray's face twisted into a cruel smirk. "Friends don't mean anything in this world, Eric. Friends are just the ones you start with. Sacrifices, they're the ones you finish with." Eric lunged for the door, pounding and screaming, but the guests on the other side only watched, their eyes gleaming through the masks. He turned back, but Ray was gone, his laughter echoing down the empty hall. Then the walls began to close in, the velvet rippling and moving as though alive. Eric could feel the walls pressing against him, wrapping around him, constricting like a snake. He struggled, gasping for air, but the walls kept tightening, the crimson fabric smothering him. The last thing he saw was Ray's face, appearing through the fabric, his eyes cold and detached. "Thanks for coming, Eric. It's been real." As Eric's vision faded, he heard the muffled sounds of applause from the other side of the door. The party continued, the laughter and music echoing through the mansion, but now his screams had become part of the beat, pulsing beneath the floorboards. The freak-off had claimed another victim, and as the guests continued their revelry, Ray smiled, knowing he'd bought himself another year. Another year of fame, fortune, and freedom.